So on behalf of BAJMC Electronic Media of Prestige Institute of Management and Research, I, Professor Bhavna Pathak, welcome you, sir. And we were just eagerly waiting. And I know, like after a long time, I got your date for this session. But finally, yes, sir. So, and when students just came to know that you are going to discuss about the storytelling, so they were eagerly waiting for this session. Because as we see on social media also, that storytelling really fascinates. So if you really want to connect with the audience and you want to touch their heart, then I think like storytelling has always been very fascinating. So how with the time and with the technology, this storytelling had several dimensions. So we are going to know more about it. So I'm not going to take too much of time. So so on the behalf of Prestige, I welcome you. I request Ashwin to kindly give a brief introduction about the sir, and then we will start the session. Over to you, Ashwin.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the lovely introduction. So before we initiate our session further, I would like to tell about Mr. Diwakar Shukla, sir. So Professor Diwakar Shukla currently is the professor and dean faculty of journalism and creative studies. He also leads the advancement and international affairs at Jagran Lake City University, Bhopal. He teaches communication for development, consumer behavior, development journalism, advertising, and digital storytelling. He has had more than 2 decades of experience in the field of social and brand communication, communication for development, new media technologies, and corporate social responsibility with various premier organizations like the World Bank, Netherlands Embassy, along with 14 years at Ogilvy. He is the winner of numerous accolades, including WWE Creme de la Creme Global Award, PP Helios Award, Dalton Penn USA, ABME, and PR Week, and others. Prior to Ogilvy, he has worked with the Indo-Dutch Bilateral Program, World Bank, and European Union projects, and with the Indian Express in areas of communication for development and social marketing and communication. He is also an advisor in various organizations, NGOs, and projects on issues related to social impact planning, digital advocacy, CSR, brand management, and research. He is also the member of core team by UNICEF for updating its syllabus on social and behavioral change communication. He is also currently the secretary of Indian Association of Media and Communication Educators. So, we welcome you to our 23rd session of Media Monitor. So, sir, before initiating a session further, could you please tell us about the various elements of storytelling?
Okay, so thank you so much for this introduction. And as Bhavna ma'am said, it's been some waiting for me as well, because every time I have been watching the Media Monitor done by all of you as the students and the faculty, and that you kind of draw them towards you is pretty fascinating. And many of them who have been on this platform, who have kind of addressed you, are a set of people that I love. And these guys are, or these these professors are, or these set of people are highly accomplished and extremely evolved set of individuals. So it's a tough ask for me to actually kind of fill in the slot today, but I'm very happy because knowing Bhavna personally, I think she's one of the finest academician that I have been interacting with. So I think Prestige that way is a very lucky institution to have her around and lead all of you. What I've done is today what I'm going to do is essentially I'm going to take all of you through a little journey actually, and it's a very obsessive journey for me. When I say obsessive journey, it essentially means is that stories, as Bhavna ma'am was saying, stories have always fascinated human species itself. Forget about us. But what is unique about storytelling in the context of where we are today is that storytelling today has evolved to the level whereby fact, fiction, neurosciences, behavioral economics, borders, politics, everything has just kind of converged now. Being media students, you all know how much creativity and technology has converged. Now imagine a situation in the world that we stay today, where technology and creativity has converged, what would be the state of affairs for a story? And a story, not only a story which makes an impact, but a story which is going to be effective. So one way of looking at stories is what our grandmothers and grandfathers and elders used to tell us. Other side of the story is the current narrative, which makes us either very powerful or it makes us go weak. And I think that is something that has to be kept in mind when we talk of stories. And the topic itself, if you look at it, I said that stories collide. The world of today, obviously, stories are colliding. It's not just the set of people or the faith or geographies or nations colliding, but the stories themselves are colliding. Now, the moment you elevate yourself to stories colliding, the entire perspectives change. So it's not a question of Diwakar against somebody else. It's a question of my narrative, my story against somebody else's. And I think that is difficult to kind of detach ourselves from, because as humans, we are wired to tell stories, and we are wired to listen to stories and wired to get impacted by stories. So I particular, kind of my slides for you, you need to understand and see that it actually goes back to a very long time when these stories come into play. And obviously, so this is all about, it's all in the brain, as we say, right? This is all in the brain. So stories that we are talking about, it's all in the brain. And if it is all in the brain, let's look at it where these stories have brought us to the timelines that we are in here today. As I understand from Bhavna ma'am, all of you in the first year of your studies at the media studies, I think if you kind of immerse yourself to what we are going to share today, you will start unraveling some of the things which you already know. So it's no rocket science. We're human beings. Somebody has a slightly greater experience, somebody has a different set of things, context, but eventually at the end of it, we have our own innate sense of understanding stories, telling stories, comprehending stories, right? So what I'm going to do is to tell you three major accidents which have happened since long years ago. And these three major accidents, I'm going to explain it to you, which actually would bring to fore how is the storytelling changing behaviors as of now. The first accident is all about telling all of you right now is that everything that you thought about how humans make decisions, whatever you know of, it's all wrong. The second aspect, which is going to be kind of myth breaking, or what we call as a myth busting, is that everything that you all know about how to change somebody else's mind is all wrong. I mean, you may think that, if I say like this, I'm going to change opinion. If I write like this, people would change. Everything is wrong. And the third aspect is, which is pretty, what I call interesting, is that everything that you saw in Star Trek movies or you saw in sci-fi movies, everything has come true. The technology and creativity part of it, which I kind of talked about. So let me just take you to almost 150 years back to this gentleman in 1848 in September. This gentleman's name was Mr. Phineas Gage. And Mr. Phineas Gage has been studied very widely by the psychologists the world over since many years actually now. So Mr. Phineas Gage essentially was one of the foremen on a project in USA, and was working on a project which was a disruptive technology at that point of time, which was called as a railroad construction, or the railway tracks construction. So the whole way the entire construction was happening was, and he was a foreman, he used to kind of go through, he used to find boulders in front of you. To remove the boulders, he used to have a huge long rod, the iron rod, with the spikes, as you say. But at times, these boulders or these rocks are very big. How do you remove these rocks? You kind of plant the dynamite, or you plant the gunpowder below it, push it through that particular iron rod, and then ignite it. There was a boom, and the boulder was away. That's how he was trying to work. But once, what happened? There was a huge boulder. So he kind of drilled a hole out there. He put the gunpowder out there. and he pushed the powder in below through that particular iron rod, which he used to call it as a perfect companion, and the gunpowder just ignited even before time. What happened was that that rod went through his cheeks, went through the skull, and came out. And by the way, to all of you, this is a real story. This has been documented very widely. It just came out from the skull. And you can all believe, I mean, we can all think of it. If a person is, kind of hurt in such a way, it's highly unlikely that the person would survive. But this gentleman, Mr. Gage, survived. He was pretty normal after 6 or 7 weeks of his hospitalization. But when he was back, there's something had shifted. Something had changed in his life. He used to be a very, very connected person. He used to be a very sharp person. He used to take decisions because he was a foreman. But after this accident, he lost that power to take decisions. He just lost that power to take decisions. And obviously, once he lost the power to take decisions, he started becoming very irritable. He started not connecting with people as well. So something had changed. At that point of time, the psychologists actually started thinking, and this is much, much later, what actually happened with Mr. Phineas Gage? Post the accident, he's just changed. And there was this gentleman, Mr. Antonio Damascus. And this particular gentleman, along with his wife, actually, they kind of looked at that particular skull of Mr. Phineas Gage and tried to understand what exactly is Gage injury. So he created from the skull itself, he created the CAT scans, imagery. He compared with the real human beings, the normal healthy human beings, and he started comparing the two brains the way that it was. And you know what he found out? He found out that many times, and this is how the neurosurgeons would tell you, there are different aspects of the brain. So there's something in the brains which is like a piece of, they're on two sides of the brain, which are like a piece of a walnut, which is called amygdala. And amygdala is called to be an emotional, hormone, like a toxin, right? And there's another portion of the brain, as you all know, which is ventromedial prefrontal cortex, right? Out here. Now, these two parts essentially are responsible for the logical side of decisions, and they are responsible for the emotional side of decisions. So, for example, if you're walking in a forest and suddenly from a distance, you see something like a snake. So amygdala in your brains would say, there is a snake, there is a snake. But the ventromedial prefrontal cortex would tell you, no, this is not a snake, this is a stick. Many times it does happen. And interestingly, the psychologists say that all people, human species less than 26 years or 25 years, do not have a very evolved set of ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which means all of you, because you'll all be under 26 right now, or 25, all of you are more driven by emotions. You're all driven by more by amygdala than by cortex, right? So that's why many times you see the top bomber pilots, the army pilots, not very many are actually, or in the high risk game, not very many, kind of professionals are, very, very younger, because it needs experience to see and deploy those rational skills part of it. So I think this is a very important piece of understanding with the psychologists, and Damasio actually found it at that point of time, whether you want to stay in the game or you want to get away from the game. This is how your amygdala looks like. You'd be wondering, why am I showing you music? This was one of the bands which was created by scientists in USA. I mean, can you imagine Bhavna ma'am and Diwakar Shukla actually joining a rock band and performing in front of all of you? These scientists actually created a...
They're just moaning no.
Yeah, but this is a fact. They created a band. Idea was to communicate.
Wow.
Idea was to communicate to the wider world about amygdala. Now, the whole point of why I'm getting you all this is to make you understand that stories collide here. It does not collide in the physical world. That's something which I wanted to, bring to fore for you to, kind of see. And actually, Antonio Damasio wrote a brilliant book And this book is so phenomenal, so seminal, where he said, we are not thinking machines as humans. We are feeling machines that think. And eventually at the end of it, almost 60 to 80% of decisions in the world are taken by emotions, not by logic, not by rationalization. And I think that again brings to fore that it's the stories which kind of, bring a lot of things to fore. I mean, some years back, obviously, Daniel Kahneman also wrote another book, which maybe some of you would have definitely read, which is Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, wherein he talked about the two parts of the brain. One part actually kind of, which is a fast thinking, kind of a brain side of it, takes decisions very quickly, but not every time the quick and fast decision making is always correct. Again, that's a book which has already been found out. There's another thing which obviously one has to understand, and this is how Baba Shiv, which is one of the professors in US, talks about how our brains function. Just take a quick look at it.
Most of our decisions, whether we like it or not, most of our actions, most of our behavior, most of our experiences are constantly being shaped at the instinctual level. I would argue that about 90 to 95% of our decisions, even important decisions, you might think that you're being rational, but keep in mind that if you pit the rational brain against the emotional brain, in general, it is the emotional brain that the rational brain does not be, it's not good at being rational. What it is good at is simply rationalize what the emotional brain has already decided.
So this is a great piece of Baba Shiv's great piece of advice, saying that it's the emotional side of our decision making, emotional side of the brain, which kind of takes most of the decisions. But many times we say, you know what, I'm not using my heart, I'm not using my emotional side to take the decision. Eventually, the idea is it's the rational side of your brain is actually just rationalizing what the emotional side is telling you. Now, very fine nuance of it. More you study about it, more you think about it, you'll find logic in this as well. And this is pretty funny and pretty contradictory that I'm talking about emotions, but I'm telling you the logic of emotions, so to say. Let me just come to the second accident which has happened. So the first accident obviously was understanding there's amygdala and prefrontal cortex, how exactly the emotional side of the brain takes precedence. What was the second accident which happened in the history of this journey that we see? In 1979, that particular thing happened. Nothing else, just a small bit of music that I played for you, again from a very good band for years, many of you would not have heard. It's What Does It Take to Change Your Mind? It's actually a lyrics of a song, actually. So I just picked it out. Brilliant piece of work, seminal piece of research done by Mr. Professor Charles Lord, who's shown out here. And you know what he said? He said, and this is how the scientists actually speak, right? Because if I have to tell you something about science, I have to sound like a scientist. Isn't it true? Otherwise, you will not believe me. Diwakar Shukla is no scientist. What is he talking about? So he said, biased assimilation and attitude polarization, the effects of prior theories on subsequent considered evidence. That's how the scientists speak. That's how somebody who's so evolved speaks. But if you're going to a cafe, so for example, if you have to describe the same theory which I told you right now, and if you were there with your friends in a cafe, how would you tell? Would you go to your friend and say, let me tell you how exactly this particular piece of research is? Would you tell them like the way that I described to you? Or would you tell them that it's just a piece of cool theory which has come up? And this is pretty interesting, the way that this theory has come up. And the issue in this particular theory is essentially is that if one has to be taken seriously, and if, for example, if somebody has to obviously understand that if somebody is trying to impress somebody, how do you impress somebody? How do you convince somebody? That is something that you have to keep in mind. How would you do it? So you'll try to describe the entire thing in the way other person understands rather than in the language which I made you understand, right? He primarily came out, Charles Lord came out three things, which again, as I said it, are defining things when you talk of accident number 2, right? And these defining things essentially are nothing else but the confirmation bias. Many of you, most of you, I would say, most of your professors would know this, that it's the confirmation bias, how exactly we are able to shape it. Let me give you an example how the confirmation bias happens. So this gentleman, the professor, actually did a small experiment. The experiment was that he kind of created a piece of research with solid evidences, and this research was all about impact and effectiveness of death penalty. And there were two sets of people who were kind of told to select themselves into two different groups. People who believe that death penalty actually makes sense and is actually impactful were clubbed into one group. The one which thought that which does not make any difference were clubbed in another group. And he gave these two groups two theories with solid evidences and research. Now, the first group which thought that death penalty actually works, looked at that theory and said, wow, don't you think I said this? Don't you think that this is true? Look, we are right. The other group who are against the death penalty, they were also giving a solid evidences that death penalty does not work. They looked at that, where the entire research said that it does not work. They looked at, man, I told you, death penalty does not make effective thing. So we are right. Then there was a game which was already embedded by Professor Charles Lord. He kind of swapped those particular researchers between these two groups. Interestingly, what do you think would have happened? When the group who was very, very clear that death penalty works and had a research in the hand, when that research piece was swapped, what did they say? They kind of went in the corner. They said, this is all crap. This is all wrong. This research is a lie. We were right. So the whole point of telling you this particular story, which is a factual piece of research, is that in a situation when people are very, very convinced and they're cornered into a position, no matter what kind of evidence you give it to them, they never change. That's what most of the media professionals, professors would also tell you the same thing. The confirmation bias, which is known in different ways. Somebody calls it a motivated reasoning, somebody calls it a filter bubble. And these are ways in which our brains function. Now, you would be wondering, and some of you at least would be wondering what is happening in today's media monitor. We are talking of like a neuroscientist. I mean, fortunately, unfortunately, brains, stories, communication, media, and impact eventually at the word of it today is so intrinsically linked to each other that it's difficult to kind of detach these two things. Something else which happened, which was again taken to the next level, whereby this particular book was written by Drew Wesley, which is The Political Brain. Another piece of a great book. If you find this particular book, please do read. And interestingly, it talks about how when, say for example, some of us divide ourselves, we have our political candidates. The other group would have their own political candidates. If my political candidates speak something, and I kind of listen to them, I'll say, wow, he's so right. He's so right, because I support the political candidate. But the same political candidate would be seen by the group who's opposing and say, no, this guy's lying. This guy's lying. So their two positions always come up. How is it possible? How is it possible that the same guy who's speaking, I find it absolutely valid, other person finds it a lie? Now, if you go to the people who actually were favoring this political candidate and tell them, you know what, we certainly gave your political candidate new set of research, which actually changes his position, what he was talking about. And remember, I'm supporting the political candidates. If I'm told like this, how would the people behave? They'll say, yeah, that's brilliant. My political candidate, he's so humble. He actually changed his opinion because there was a new piece of research which was gone to him. But the people who actually were against him would say, I told you, this guy was lying. This guy was lying. Our brains are playing the trick. Brilliant book, written actually from the perspective of how brains portions light up when there is a lie. And interestingly, in the democracies, in US, definitely it has happened many times when the elections are happening. When you have those presidential debates, the what you call a set of audiences actually have those monitors, the faith monitors, the trust monitors, and they keep on clicking. You actually know who's lying, who's not lying. When does the women react to being something of importance, something which is not important? So again, the whole point is the reasoning, the logic part of it goes in sidelines. It's the emotions which take over and actually make ourselves extremely, extremely important, right? Let me just move on. Many times in this context, you'll understand that there's a great set of theories, great set of researchers have been done recently, where they are talking of when you debunk the myths related to vaccines, Even then, the parents, people are not able to understand that vaccines are effective. Now, this piece of work, we were recently doing some work with UNICEF, and while understanding vaccination, we came across this particular research that even while you're debunking the myths, people do not believe into what, because there's a polarized point of view they have already taken, right? So there are different ways of looking again at the storytelling, looking at how exactly your mind changes and what actually happens in context to where all of you are. So first is obviously that arguing the facts doesn't help. It makes the situation worse. So many times you would have seen that, you keep on arguing with your friend, with your set of people and staking the claim, no, I'm right. You keep on saying that, isn't it true? Many times you do that. But usually, do you think that people change just because you're arguing, you're putting a great set of facts? No, they do not. So arguing facts doesn't help. It makes the situation worse. Keep in mind. What is the second big thing which happens in case of situation? Repeating the myth advertently polarizes it by accident, actually. If you keep on repeating the myth over and over and over again, it actually polarizes the situation in a very, very unique way, actually. And this particular, this part of the repeating the myth and how it polarizes has 2 or 3 brilliant concepts embedded as a part of this. One obviously is called as an illusionary truth myth or the illusionary truth effect, right? It just creates an illusion of a truth rather than the truth itself. Second is there's something what we call as, and Bhana ma'am would echo that, is called as a mirror exposure effect, as a part of that. And the third is what we call as a availability heuristics. I'll give you an example how to relate to this. You talk about the fake news these days, right? Ma'am is a trainer and fact-checking trainer as well. When you talk of the fake news, when you talk of fact-checking, what happens? Is it the content which is kind of making you believe in that? Do you think that? You see a content which is fake. Is it the content which is pushing you to believe into that fake news? No. It's this particular reverberations. Zillion times the same news being repeated over and over again actually creates that particular myth of a truth. And I know a lot of work is happening in the facts and fake news and those things, but I think this is where it actually comes to. Another thing which is part of it, affirmation works, but we rarely use it. All of you as communicators and media people, please understand going forward. Affirmation works a lot. Why do we not utilize this ability of human species to start the things with affirmation? Why do we not take efforts to bring down the shields that somebody else is carrying with them? Make sure that you are able to say, you have a great point which you brought to fore. And I think it needs a great level of research. It needs a great level of understanding. But I have a different point of view. People will believe. And that's something which the media trainers call it as a bridging activity as well. It's called bridging also. And that is something that you have to keep in mind, that affirmation does work. And that's how the brains work, right? And we consistently underestimate, and this is why we are here, the power of narrative. We consistently underestimate the power of narrative. And we kind of never look at it, what essentially it means, how does it mean, right? Very, very interesting books. You must, if you, and when I was, just kind of drumming up this particular some slides for you, these just books popped into my head. I said, I am going to put it so that whenever you can find these books, you can read them. Very, very interesting, piece of work, which he says, and this particular gentleman, Professor Charles Safe, he says that if you want to get people to believe in something absolutely stupid, just put a number on it. So it's like saying that we just get blinded by science and by facts and by graphs and by figures. And that is pretty amusing, huh? That's pretty amusing. You never know. I may be telling you something which is absolutely stupid, but I'm giving you a whole lot of jigsaw. I'm putting a whole lot of, kind of visuals there, some books there, some theories there, and maybe trying to convince you that whatever I'm saying, I'm right. It does work. Most of the times it does work. May not be working with you, but it could definitely work in the real world as you go out, right? And this is again another piece of great work. Blinded with science. So trivial graphs, whatever you see around yourself, eventually at the end of it, if you pick up a company which is a fake pharmaceutical company, if you just put some scientific bars as a part of its efficacy, certainly the believability shoots up from 67% to 97%. And that's an example and the case which has already happened. So the conclusion of this particular slide essentially is nothing else. But even if the issues and content is absolutely trivial, the elements are absolutely trivial, putting a graph or a scientific spiel to it actually elevates it to the level of believability. Now, we'll have to think in mind that it should not cross the line of fact and fiction. That is something each one of us has to take care of it. But if you want to persuade somebody, you'll have to think it from that particular perspective, right? So is there a better way to change minds? The way that you see the world around yourself. We're talking of asking people to put masks, have a social distancing, do this, do that, keep on nagging them without even thinking, is there a better way of changing minds? It is. And this is what we call as a narrative transportation. It just transports you. It immerses you, takes you to the level whereby you are able to transport yourself into a situation which is where you believing in something. And this is where the empathy comes into play. It's an important piece of advice. I have a gentleman that I know very well. I mean, I haven't met him for long years now, but I would see, I think I have this particular gentleman. Listen to him.
So my research is really about imagination. And what I study is how we imagine ourselves in the worlds of fiction. So when we read a book, television, or watch a film, we imagine ourselves as if we're a part of this narrative world. And we're likely to experience thoughts as well as feelings that are consistent with what's going on in this fictional world. So it's not at all uncommon.
Sorry.
It's going on.
Sorry.
In this fictional world. So as well as emotional information, often drawing upon our own past experiences. After these neuroscience investigations, I did a few behavioral studies, and I was interested in this idea that if it's the case that when we're reading a book or watching a film that we're constantly engaging these sort of perspective-taking or empathizing skills, then it might be the fact, or it might be possible that individuals who read a lot of books would be better at understanding what other people are thinking and feeling. And this sort of runs counter to the stereotype, I would say, because I think there's a stereotype of frequent readers as being somewhat socially awkward because they've removed themselves from the social world. So they've chosen the company of print over peers. But what I found in my data was that individuals who had been exposed to more fiction tended to better on a test of social abilities, controlling for their general intelligence, their gender, their English fluency, as well as their trait personality.
Now, this Professor Raymond actually is talking about the difference between when fiction is deployed as a part of a narrative transportation vis-a-vis non-fiction, how exactly the listeners or readers' brains change and what happens. What does it tell us? It tells us that the crafting of narrative, and crafting a narrative as a part of his studies itself would be a body of work. There'd be many things which come into play. But what you have to keep in mind based on what he was saying is the crafting of narrative or narrative itself is so important, and how you want to play with it. And it can either break your communication or actually make your communication. It can provide an impact on it or may not provide an impact. It may move people and move faiths, or it may not move people and move faiths. So the whole point of telling you this transportive narration is that narratives are very important. How it is crafted is a part of, again, a story, right? What is the third accident which happened and which brings to, to this particular gentleman who's Giacomo Rizzolatti? He's a brilliant scientist and a brilliant professor. He was very interested in finding out, like you have a genome mapping, he was very interested in finding out what if we map the neurons in a brain, how do the neurons move? What happens? I say something and I see Mehak, for example, Mehak responds in a particular way. Bhavna man responds in a particular way. Everybody responds in their own particular way, right? What is happening? What am I saying that Mehak is responding in a different way and Bhavna man is responding in a different way? There will be something. He wanted to map the neurons. So he kind of attached gadgets, machines, recording stuff to the brains. And what, to whom? He kind of collected a set of rhesus monkeys, right? And he collected the set of rhesus monkeys and he gave them something to eat, something which they love. Things were kept there. Monkeys used to pick it up, eat, and there was a noise, grrr, grrr, because the monkeys were loving it. He used to give it, recording was done. But then somewhere in the middle of it, one of the crew members of Rosaletti, Professor Rosaletti, actually picked up that particular thing which the monkeys were eating and ate himself in front of the monkey. What happened? Again, that beeper, which was recording, said, eh. Then suddenly, professor was kind of astonished. He said that, well, this is not attached to this member's brain. How come this kind of thing just went up, although the monkey did not eat anything? That point of time, he realized that there is something what we call as a neural mirrors. The way that we act in each other, the other person reacts to it and maybe reacts to it in the brain. And many times that particular thing happens, which means without actually connected physically with each other, there's something which is playing in our heads when I see something happening in front of me. And I think that is what we know as the brain activity through version, wherein if you consistently see something happening in front of you, your brain starts activating that the way that you, as if you were doing it, actually. So you start mirroring in your head, in your brain, whatever is happening in front of you. That gives you another cue. When you have a great set of messaging to play in your communication, what is that you want to do? How consistently you want to do? Some of you may actually graduate to become advertising and communication professionals beyond just the journalism. You would utilize these techniques, how you want to push and motivate set of audiences in such a way that they may feel like they're doing something, whereas only you are doing that particular thing, or the communication trigger is only doing something. And that is, again, another way of how narratives are built up. I do not know how many of you, because all of you are very young, how many of you would have seen Star Trek? Can anyone tell me if anybody has seen Star Trek?
So I might have seen a few episodes.
The older one?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. If you have done it, superb. I'm very happy because I'm going to show you, some of you may not have seen the Vulcan mind, right? And this is neural coupling that I was talking about. I'll just skip these slides because I think, now if I just show you these particular faces, in your head, you'll start making faces like this. Right? So that's what I was just trying to provoke emotions and trying to tell you that. Let me show you this Vulcan mind.
Our minds sharing the same thoughts. Name.
So Vulcan mind, essentially, it was all obviously fiction, but it happened. That's why I said everything which you have seen in the sci-fi movies coming true. It actually happens when neural coupling happens. We see and react and kind of immerse ourselves into, and that's really, really part of what you call storytelling and part of how exactly behaviors get changed as well. The experiments, the factual pieces of work which has been done to prove how neural coupling happens. This is not just not a fiction that we're talking about, it actually happens. Now, choice is yours as a communication professional. Choice is yours as a journalist or a media person. You want to deploy the science, neurosciences in your work and make it more effective for goodness of the earth. Well, that's your call. If you escape it, then I think you're missing a piece which is very, very critical part of it, right? How does a neuroscience and initially, you asked me, what are the elements of what you call a storytelling? Simple enough to look at it. How do you do it? So one is that the great stories are always universal. There's something that we do as a which is known as insights or universal truths. You may be in Indore, somebody's in London, somebody's in Bhopal, somebody's in Lucknow. All of us have common universal truths. The media communication industry, the media communication professionals, the journalists, we work on common universal truths. भूख सबको लगती है, प्यास सबको लगती है, emotions सबके हैं, context change. And I think the brilliant communication professionals, and I keep on telling my students as well, you can learn any damn thing from any global university or any place. What you cannot learn is the context. Context के लिए आपको आपके प्रोफेसर्स की जरूरत होती है, आपके मेंटर्स की जरूरत होती है, आपको ट्रैवल करने की जरूरत होती है, एंड आपको पढ़ने और देखने की जरूरत होती है. That's the reason great stories have a universal appeal and a universal truth to it. Second part is great stories always have a clear structure. Always. You'll always find the best of the stories have a clear structure, how you pursue things very, very well. Because if it is not a structure, you may think that you have been able to do a great job, but it does not work. Another thing which comes to mind is great stories have a character to root for, an underdog. All the movies that you love, you always love the movies where the underdog eventually wins. If it was not the case, there would be no heroes, no villains, right? You have to have a villain to make the hero look good, as people say. So you need to have an underdog to build up the story in such a way that you're able to kind of build up a story which has an impact. Now, many of you would be wondering, where do I get the character? Who's this character? Does the character is an actor? Character could be anything. Character could be an issue. Character could be a situation. Character could be a country. Character could be a person. Character could be a thought process, a philosophy. You just have to imagine that the character is your philosophy and you want to put and create communication around your philosophy. That becomes a character. Underdog or no underdog. Great stories appeal to our deepest emotions. We talked about in the Excellence 1. It's the emotions which are connecting. So make sure that whatever stories you're going to tell, is there emotional triggers into it or not? Because our minds fight for emotions, right? Again, great stories are surprising and unexpected. So there is hardly a story which has kind of stuck in our heads if it has not got a great element of surprise and unexpectedness. See any movie, English or Hindi or Marathi or Bengali, you'll find that unexpected twists coming in a situation which actually hooked us into the narrative very, very closely. And we keep on remembering that, right? They're simple and focused. Simplicity is another thing which you have to keep in mind when you're building the stories. Obviously, do you think that every hero in the world is a perfect person? It cannot be. Because the moment you show a flaw, moment you show a weakness, moment you show a chink in the armor of that particular so-called hero, the person becomes human. As humans, we connect to them. We may be in awe with gods. We may be awe in something which is unreal. But eventually at the end of it, if the impact has to happen, it is that dynamic, flawed human that we attach ourselves to. So please remember one thing, not everything is honky-dory and perfect. A story which is a factual story, in whichever context you want to use it, make sure that there are characters and set of people that you latch out to are real. There may be flaws in the characters as well, that's perfectly fine. Get inside your characters, get inside your hero's head, as we call it. I'm not asking you to make a film, believe me. These stories I'm not talking to you about in terms of only making a documentary or a film. Stories could be anything. You want to do a great journalism piece, bring an element of storytelling into it, and you see your piece, your journalistic piece, rising above the rest. Think of stories related to these pandemic times. Where are the stories there? Are there stories only of helplessness and hopelessness which you see around ourselves? Or is there something more which is lurking in the landscape of this pandemic, which can be kind of extracted and stories can be told in a factual manner? Give yourself or your heroes or your characters a worldview. Many times we tend to forget that we see heroes, characters, elements that we put in our stories, or the messages that we put in our stories as devoid of any real world. Why can't we have a real world, a world wherein I see the world in the way that I want to see? That is what makes us human, isn't it? Bring those elements into your heroes or your characters, or what you call as a philosophy of the story itself. You'll find that the worldview makes a big, big difference, the point of view, right? Obviously, as I said it, you need to have a villain in your story. Build up a challenge. And classic way of documenting, and I'm sure that many of you would do your projects eventually, or you may be doing it. How, and I'm just leaving this thought with you. How does it happen when you have a project which your professor has given you and you have a presentation date? You make a presentation. If your presentation is great and the professors clap for you, great. But the professors say, you could have done better. So the first thought comes to your mind, and everybody gets it, even I would get it. We have an excuse in our heads saying that, what, I was at the party, I could not work so hard. Or maybe my internet was down, maybe Express was down. So there's always a challenge that we build and express, which makes our projects and our stuff look better. And that's a human nature. Building up a challenge in such a way, smartly, that whatever you have done looks even better. And that is how the challenges and the hero and villains are made, of course. Have something to fight for. In a story, and remember, many of you would become journalists. Do you have things to fight for in the story? Do you bring that out in your stories as a part of your narrative pieces? If you can, your stories would latch on, your audiences would latch onto those stories because they identify themselves with the characters, with the narrative, with the fight that you're sharing to them, and they root for you as a storyteller or as a person who's the protagonist in this particular case, right? So always show rather than telling. An example is very, very clear. You have to say, you have to describe somebody, you have to put up a story. He felt depressed. I can say that. You'll all understand that he's talking about somebody who's depressed. But why should I say it like this? I can describe it in a different way, saying that for 6-7 days, he had not moved from his smelling sofa. He was lying, he had not had the dinner, for example. His books, stuff was lying on the floor. He had been hungry, but he does not remember when was the last time he actually ate something. Idea is to paint a picture in somebody's head so that it comes alive. Because if you do not do so, people would listen to you, people would get what you're trying to convey to them, but it would never stick. And that's another thing which I want to tell you. There's a brilliant book, if you can find out, do read it. It's called Made to Stick. There are two brothers, Chip Heath and Dan Heath, who have written that book. It tells you simplest of ways in which things stick in our heads. It will give you a good sense of understanding where the game of storytelling essentially. This is the book that I was talking about, right? Anybody has an idea which is the shortest story? I'll just take 2-3 minutes more. Which is the shortest story ever told? Which is the shortest ever story told in the world? It was written actually by Ernest Hemingway on a piece of tissue paper in a coffee shop when somebody actually recognized him long years back and said, "Oh, so you're Mr. Hemingway, write a story for me." And Mr. Hemingway on that tissue paper wrote, "For sale, baby shoes never worn." All of you just think about it post this session. How many stories can spill out of this story? In many ways. You're wondering, why selling the baby shoes? Why weren't they worn? What happened? Stories after story. So the idea is the power of narrative again builds up. And again, it's very, very simple thing which all of you understand. Make it concrete. Do not make it abstract, because obviously both sides have different theories to it. Concrete, why does it stick with that? Abstractionism, why does it work? But make sure that you're talking of concrete stuff rather than abstractionism, which nobody can understand, right? So I can tell you, when you go and when the pandemic is over, all of you go and watch a movie in theaters in Indore. But please do not eat this big tub of popcorns. Somebody will tell you, because nobody goes to the gym, I know. You all pay for the gym, but you never go. But the fact of the matter is, do not eat this tub of popcorn because it equals 37 grams fat. Some of you tell me, go get lost. I'm not worried about it. I'm here to watch a movie with my friends and family. I want to have the cheese popcorn. But if I tell you, because you're not able to understand this 37 grams of fat, what does it mean? But if I tell you, equivalent of this tub is so much of a food that you eat. If I take out the exact components of fat, this is what it will equal to. So make it concrete. And I think that, and this is a real story, by the way, real story which had come out in New York Times. So that is how you make it. And always remember one thing. Please remember, I have been trying my best not to do it. Do not use these words. Let me just read you. Synergistic, value-added, innovation, paradigm, out-of-box, shareholder value, and what does it actually mean? It means nothing. You just keep on talking of words a word after, but nobody understands what these words are, which are called as a mind-numbing bingo words. Do not use it. The whole point of telling you this is, as much as possible, keep things extremely simple. More you do it, you will feel very, very excited and very happy.
Hi guys, what's going on?
So I just want to skip to a couple of examples and then I'll open it up for Q&A if anybody has any questions. How to make things concrete. Look at this.
All the plastic water bottles we use in a year can add up.
How's the run?
It's Brita, filtered for good.
So they were launching a filter bottle rather than plastic bottles. So if I told you, if you use plastic, the entire planet Earth will be covered by plastic, would you be able to understand? No. But if I show you plastics everywhere, it's a sea of plastic. There's another long, almost 1 minute or 45-second commercial of this particular brand. Bottles after bottles. It just strikes you so hard. You stop using those particular plastic bottles. You say, I'll carry my own bottle. Let me show you another way of how to make things from abstract things, turn it into something concrete, and how does it impact?
¿Qué tienen ahí? Un avión más, un avión gigante. Ah, un avión. ¿Eso? Dicen que tienen un avión. ¿Y se puede volar a cualquier lado con el avión? Sí, a todos los lugares del mundo. ¿Y a Papúa? ¿Qué es Papúa? Una isla. Se debe poder. Chicos, estos señores dicen que ustedes tienen en la lata un avión.
Matías, ese avión tiene que estar mañana en Roma a las 10:35. Hay mucha gente que necesita viajar y hay mucha gente que lo está esperando. Todos necesitan que ese avión llegue.
Y si esta vez los que creen tienen más razón que los que no creen. Dinero.
So this was an ad which was created for Argentina Airlines. See how the narrative has been put, but look at the beauty of this is how the messaging has been put. So Argentina Airlines at that point of time were trying to tell the audiences, consumers in the world over, that the airlines is extremely punctual. Many of us do that particular, kind of a game when we were kids. Certainly when the plane is passing over, I see the shadow and I open the box and the plane goes inside and I keep it with me, thinking that the plane is there inside my box. Isn't it true? But actually the plane is not there, right? So when you see this particular ad, all of us, even if I'm a child, say, what absurd things you are showing it to me? How is that possible? The pilot's actually coming down, but that's a power of narrative. You're fusing, you're creating metaphors and making sure that whatever you're trying to say, it's appealing to the neurons. It is appealing to that part of amygdala where the raw emotions actually lay down. Last, video I want to show it to you, which tells you exactly how to make things concrete and how powerful that it is.
I think I was always misunderstood. People just didn't seem to like me. I think I annoyed them. I got on their nerves. I don't know why. That's just the way it was. Yeah. Maybe I was too intense. Maybe I came on too strong. I don't know. I really can't say. Yeah, it was lonely. Really lonely. You get used to it after a while. And then one day, everything changed. Somebody finally accepted me for what I am. Since I've got this job, life is completely different. I finally feel useful, good at something.
You saw how wind from abstract converted into a person. And look at the power of imagination, as Professor Ronald was telling earlier in his studies. The more you are able to have a narrative in your head and frame your story in such a way, maybe using fiction, maybe using non-fiction, but making sure that whatever you're doing has a meaning, and there is a trigger for the neurons, there is a trigger for the amygdala, there is a logic or a magic to it. There is a sense of what triggers off in what context. What do those theories of neurosciences say? Telling people to wear mask is not going to change. Telling people that climate change is happening, we can see the seas rising and the glaciers melting, is not going to change the entire game when it comes to climate change. There's something more to it, right? There's something more to it. And there's a brilliant studies, which is like, again, Daniel Kahneman had done it, the prospect theory, which talks about the fact that people actually, buy more in terms of, or have the fear of losing more than the thrill of gaining something out of it. So you wear mask, corona would not happen to you. You can play it in a negative sense. You can also play it in a positive sense. Now, there's no clear answers to it because human species do not have a clear answers to it. Only thing which we know very, very clearly as communication professionals, as media people, as researchers, is that there is something which happens in our brains which makes the power of storytelling most powerful when it is deployed in the right sense. And there's a science and art to it, honestly. Now, everybody talks about storytelling. And as ma'am was saying, everybody talks about storytelling. Not but every story would make a sense. Now, when we're talking storytelling to change behaviors or change and bring about impact in the world, using media, different ways of doing it, it means the stories which have a structure and which are phenomenal, which have a craft behind them. So that's why, we all keep on telling each other, understand the craft of building up narratives. And I think it always works, invariably always works in that context, right? That is something I would miss this. I would skip this particular video. It takes time, but there's a brilliant place in New York. Whoever has traveled ever, in New York, in Manhattan, there is a plaque on the roads which says that the universe is made of stories, not of atoms. And this is an actual thing. It comes from a poem, a piece of poem written by Muriel Ruksair, where this has been picked up. But how apt it is in the middle of one of the what you call most developed and most concrete city in the world, in New York. There's this plaque which says the universe is made of stories, not of atoms. So it's more to that. And I would kind of end out here, and I would feel that all of us need to understand where our stories are. When I say our stories, you need to understand your stories, that they're going to be built up as time passes and as you are able to, kind of immerse yourself with the reality of it. So thank you so much. If there's anything that I can respond to, I'll be happy to do that. Thank you.
So I would like to ask you,
yeah,
that could you tell us a story of some character which you felt connected to the most?
Character. Hello, you said character?
I said a story or a character which you felt a connection with.
Oh, well, there are many, actually. If you ask me, there are many, if you talk of, of course, there are always a favorite characters when you see movies and cartoons. Obviously, those are there for all of us. But I've always connected with some of the characters as when I started, reading some books here and there. I have, in a general sense, and I'm giving a context because there is a context to what I'm going to tell you. I've always found those characters come closer to me, or I feel attached to, who are very real, who do not have a gloss over them. That's why I used to love Irfan Khan. I used to love him. And that's why I love characters from this book, Rag Darbari, which is written by Shilal Shukla, based in North India in the village. All those Rupan Babu and the characters and Vadjis, if you read that book, it is so contemporary. I kind of latch on to those characters because they're very real and you can find them nook and corner or wherever you go. I find characters who are completely in sync with not adhering to the stereotype, something which everybody follows and they follow. I somehow detach myself, but the people who are against what we call as against the tide, I find myself very lashed onto those particular characters. So the nuances of a kind of a character I like are these types. It could manifest into any shape, any form. Honestly, there are many. But why I say so is because I feel that through those particular characters, whether it is a film or it is a book or it is a poem or it is animation, I somehow feel that I'm able to live through, my life through them. Somehow I feel, and that's the beauty of those characters, the way that they have been crafted, the nuances of it. That's why, one of the things as a part of, since you had asked me earlier also, part of storytelling is you may have a character, but have you put your mind and heart and soul behind building that character? That's what the filmmakers will teach you. Build up the character. You see Amitabh Bachchan walking out on the first shot of in a movie. Amitabh Bachchan would walk out with a swag. His entry, Shah Rukh Khan's entries are made to be big. Ajay Devgan's entries are made to be big. They're from a popular films and popular culture. Why? Because you want to build up a character, and a character that I as an audience will be able to identify. So I relate very, very well with the real world kind of a touch to those characters, and I feel that's why I love biopics big time.
Yes, I have a question. So as you were talking about story writing and psychology, so writer's block is a common problem among the writers. So my question to you is that what psychology is behind this? Like, even I've started writing and sometimes I have a topic in mind and in between I'll just stop. There are no flow of ideas and I'm just stuck at one place. So what psychology is behind that?
Okay.
And
So,
is there any solution regarding that?
Okay. So Harsh, I'm not an author. I'm not a journalist. I don't know what I am by it, but your question is very right and very pertinent. And it does happen with all of us. I also do not know what is the theory or psychology behind it, but I know one thing for sure out here. That when we get stuck, and if you are writing some piece, whatever you're writing, if you get stuck, of course you're a human being, right? You're not a machine. So you would get stuck. Why do you get stuck? Is because, as I said earlier, as humans, as our brains are wired to react to situations, to react to triggers, actually, right? They're wired to tell stories and understand stories. They're wired to understand triggers. They're wired to understand and take cues from a neural coupling, which I was talking about. When we get stuck, you may be thinking that you want to write a story or a piece, but your brain is not moving because it's stuck in various formats. You may not realize it many times. So what do the best authors do? They just take a break. They shut down their copies, notebook, diaries, pens, paper, and they just move on. And they start writing another book. I know many of such writers, very well known, who said, I started a book, wrote about 100 pages and shut down that novel. And I started writing another novel. At a later point of time, that novel came back to me. This is how they explain. That novel came back to me. That's when again it opened up its page, saying, write me rather. So your point is absolutely correct. Definitely, because our brains there are different sections in our brain, like any neuroscientist will tell you. But what is important to understand, how do these parts in our brains actually interact? Where do they get the triggers from? The moment something is lacking, or another part of the brain, maybe amygdala, just overpass other parts, you would get stuck. You are in an imaginary world of writing something piece, but your front cortex is giving logic to it. It's telling you, your amygdala, the raw emotion, yourself, what are you writing? It does not work. It's so fake. It would not stick with people. I mean, you're not convinced. Why are you even writing it? Now, there is a dvand ho raha hai between, there's a fight happening in your brain. You are stuck. Your physical being is stuck. Your brain is at work. So the best way physically you do is to just work out from that situation, say, okay, fair enough, I'll see it later on. So definitely it has to do with the way that the brains are constructed, evolved over the period of time? And I think maybe that is the answer to your point.
Yeah, surely, sir. वो जो द्वंद वाली बात आपने कही, I've certainly experienced that thing. Yeah, right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thanks.
Sir, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I was thinking about the Asian societies, I mean, because when we talk about the rational approach, or, I mean, it's being said that the Asian communities are the emotional communities. So when it comes to write the story or to narrate a story, I mean, how to balance this rational approach and the, I mean, we should be more emotional. I mean, because the society is emotional, or we have to balance this rational approach as well as the emotions.
Right.
So what should be the perfect blend? Yeah.
So, ma'am, you're right, absolutely right. As a society, and if we say Asia Pacific or Southeast Asia itself, if we keep it closer to the home, it's so diverse. It's so diverse that I mean, even if you want to be extremely rational, extremely logical, and extremely structured, the way if you want to approach any kind of a story, even if it is a journalistic piece, at a point of time you'll get stuck. I mean, when I say get stuck, means is that you'll be found wanting in terms of how you connect. Other side of the picture is that you have to, if you're a journalist, then obviously you have to tell the factual story. You have to bring the information to fore without biases and without opinions into it. Then how do you fuse the emotional part of the stories? I'll give you an example which kind of relates very well to your question. When Obama in the first term, he was pitching for he was doing the presidential election tours. The issue at that point of time was that the US of that particular time was going in a different directions. And he knew that a lot of blacks in US are still kind of subjected to different kind of biases. One of the things which he thought was, can I drive this particular bunch of voters and younger ones as well to the fore so that they start voicing and saying things? How did he do? I mean, he's a very knowledgeable person. Rather than giving facts, rather than giving a lot of numbers, rather than giving a lot of statistics to prove what he was trying to say, he brought out a fourth of a story which he talked about when that black lady was thrown out of the bus in Chicago. That became the starting block for him to pick up the story of blacks where it is. And in the same vein, he talked about how blacks in US today are the topmost surgeons. Then in the same vein of his narrative, he talked about how blacks in USA are the top sports people and musicians in USA. How they are more American than so-called many other segments of the population. So what he did was, he was bringing facts to life, because he's a learned man that way. He wanted to bring the facts to life. Basis the facts, he wanted the people to vote for him. But what did not miss him was this metaphors, emotions, symbols of that particular story, which could have gone in the way of being extremely, extremely factual, extremely logical, rather than emotional. In the same context, I think in Asia, or in the markets, in the communities that we're talking about, I think it's so diverse. You see around yourself and you see a story popping out from the corner, under the stone, on the grass, under the house. I mean, you have stories after story. If I'm a journalist, I'll try to bring that stories to life to express a point of view and information which people can relate to. If I'm a filmmaker, I'll bring out those elements of a story which are actually very emotional. But yeah, it may have a lot of facts and figures to it. That's a perfectly fine thing. Now, this actually, ma'am, goes against a contradiction of what I was saying earlier, that many times you just put a graph or a scientific spiel to it and the story starts looking very believable. Yeah, but that particular, I feel the life is very short. Remember, any of those stories which stick in your head, they would all be emotional stories rather than the factual stories and the number stories.
Right, sir. There are some questions from the participant side. So one is from Priyanka Ramchandani, and she wants to ask, what according to you are the great stories, sir?
Which obviously, one is that they have to have a context. I cannot have a story from rural hinterland of India. I cannot have a story from Shahdol or from Sihor or from Lucknow or from Kolhapur, and I'd use that particular story and transport it into into Europe somewhere. It does not work. It does not work. So the context and perspectives have to be very important as far as the storyteller of the crafting of the narrative is concerned. That's my number one point. Second point, the greatest stories are the ones which trust their readers and audiences. I mean, like as if they are the most intelligent set of people. Many of these prints, you may not have heard of him or not read it, but David Ogilvy once, and David Ogilvy is the world's one of the biggest, what you call advertising gurus, so to say. He had once said in context to consumer and brands, he said that your consumers are not morons. Many of you know what is a moron. It's an idiot. So consumers are not morons. They are your wives. They know everything. So all of you are not married, I know. But when you get married, you realize the power of a wife. She knows everything, right? So in a very lighter way, but in a very profound way, he had put this particular point that consumers are not moron, right? In the same context, the stories, the best of authors or the best of stories are the ones who trust that their readers would be intelligent enough to interpret things out of them. That's why they leave a lot of exit points as part of their stories. So when you're reading a story, even if it is a fiction or a non-fiction, you're able to conjure up imagery of that particular story. There's a concreteness to that particular logic and the story which they're telling you. It is not fluffy and faff. There is an element of truth, as we call it, in those particular stories. That's another point. Third point, which I would always say, I have always been, Bhavna, fascinated with the books or the stories. And maybe it's a very personal opinion. I have always been fascinated with the stories which have a brilliant opening line. And I remember when I was in a university, whatever books I used to read, I used to keep a diary with me. And I used to always, whenever I used to read a book, I used to always write down the opening line of that book. Good, bad, ugly, whatever it was. And at a point of time, I realized I had nothing short of 100, 150 opening lines at that point of time. And then, I mean, this is more of an afterthought. Obviously, then I was not into, kind of teaching and academics and research. So I did not realize what I was doing. But today, if I look back, and if I have to just take out the best ones, are the ones which have been iconic books. So all great stories have a great opening. I don't know about the ending, but I know about the great opening.
One more question is from Saloni, and she want to ask, like, whenever we write a story, I mean, you have words, but you don't know how to arrange them in particular manner. Why this happens? Why there is mess of words?
No, because I think it's like if I push you in the corner, and it's in a commonsensical way, I'm saying, responding to your question. If I push you in the corner and say, today, and even if you're a brilliant writer, even if you have a great skills of words and language, and I push Saloni or Harsh right now in the corner and tell him, write 2 pages right now in front of you. You're not able to write. The reason is, there's a simple reason logic to it. And that's why many times we flunk in examinations, to all of you. Many times we flunk in examination. But when ma'am said, Harsh, come on, stand up and tell me something about it randomly, while you are afraid, what happens? How do I respond to her extempore? But you are able to tell exactly what your professor is trying to understand from you. So in context to what Saloni asked, so when you put into the corner and push closer and you're forcing yourself to write, neither you'll get a context. If you're not getting the context, you'll not get the words. Many times also one more thing which happens. How is that you're trying to write? Have you studied a larger literature that the words come to you? Or is it because you have read number of books and you think that you're a writer and you start writing about it? There will be a point of time where you will be short of words. You'll not even think, but you'll not get the words because words have not come to you and never seen those particular words. So whenever you get in a situation where you feel that you want to write, you have a great thoughts, but you are unable to express it and put into words, I think the only way of overcoming this thing is, as I was telling Harsh earlier, one is just relax. Give your mind that space, breathing space for you to words to come to you, number one. Number two, read a lot of literature. If you can find out books which are French but translated into English, read. If you have a Bengali piece which have been translated into Hindi or English, read. Because variety of words and context and emotions doesn't come only in a singular linear way. Our minds get ideas, imaginations from diverse ways. But unfortunately, all of us, whether you are there or all of us are there, we have closed ourselves so much that we do not read and we do not watch. One my lesson to all my students, I often tell them is, do not worry about what is good and what is bad. Just bindas read, daba ke movies dekho, daro mat. More you will experience that. And of course, your value systems are so strong because of your parents, because your professors and your teachers, you'll never go wrong. But read and write and watch and hear. Because if you do not know, then how can you be a communication professional? So Saloni, my advice to you is bilkul simple. I'm not an author, so I cannot give you a definitive answer to it. But I can tell you one thing. Whenever you get stuck of not finding a word, coin a word. Can you coin a word? If you're not getting a word and say, oh God, what do I write? Until unless it is a piece which Bhavna ma'am has to check. Do not wrong there. But if you're writing a piece which is for your own self or for your friends or for anybody else, coin a word. That's what Shakespeare has been doing, right? Many of the authors do it. Who cares? Once you come out of the word, it would come in a dictionary and say, this is what Saloni came up with. So do not fear. It's your mind. It's your story. That's why I said, what's your story? It's your story. You better be good at it. All of us would only hear you. All of us would only, read your story. We are not judges here. I mean, that's the simplest way of looking at it.
I mean, there are several questions. I'm taking one more. I mean, though I know it's 6:30,
No.
it's been like, even you'll be exhausted, sir. No. So, but it's a fascinating session, I must say. I mean, it's so engaging. So, Gauri, want to ask that there are 10 ways to tell a story. How do I know which one is right?
Oh, wow. I need to understand and study a bit more on this. It's a good question. There are various ways of telling a story. Which are those 10 ways, by the way? Her name is Gauri, right?
Gauri, yeah.
Gauri, which are those 10 ways? I mean, I do not know those 10 ways. Okay. So we some other point of time, we'll understand what are those 10 ways. But having said that, my first point is, why do you want to bracket yourself or limit yourself to a number, to a way that story has to be told? Forget about what everybody's saying. Forget about the way the stories are written, told, narrated, whether it is advertising story or a journalism story, whatever it is. The higher form of storytelling I'm talking about. What you have to trust is which story to select or which way to tell the story is, look at who you are telling the story to, right? As simple as that. If you say that you're standing in a slum and you have to tell a story to 5 years and 6 year kids, would you even think for a second, Gauri, what kind of a way or what approach you have to take to tell the story to a 5 years or 6 year old? Even if you do not know storytelling, I'm saying. No, your innate sense of storytelling, your innate sense of expression would bring it out for you. What would it do? It would look at those 5 years, 6 years, 7 year old kid in a slum, and your brain would take those signals, and whatever narration you have to do, whatever story you have to tell them, the content wise I'm talking about, or whatever message you have to give to their story, you will just fuse it in the way that you want it. Many times I've seen the best storytellers, the professional I'm talking about, are the ones who curate story from the audiences to start with, because they get the cues of what to tell them and what not to tell them. I had a boss what he used to do was, he used to involve the audiences into storytelling the way that he used to do. And he was, CNBC in US, he was the topmost journalist for Wall Street Journal for many years. He used to curate stories from the audiences themselves. So what I would advise you is, do not follow any pattern, any path in terms of the story. What you have to remember is, what does a story need? Number two, what are those things which would stick in the audience's head, the simplicity or whatever you want to do it. Remember those things and naturally it could come to you. Now, forget about us right now. And same thing goes with Bhavna ma'am. So before I came into academics, I used to work with the World Bank, and there was a point of time somebody used to tell me, and if my child was then 4 years old, and if I had to go back home and explain to my 4-year-old child, what do I do? what do I do? Or if you're a journalist, and imagine you have to tell a 5-year, 4-year-old nephew or niece of yours at home, what do you do? Explain what do you do. Let me give you another thing closer to all of you. All of you are pursuing your graduation first years in media, broadcast journalism, right? Broadcast media. You go home today, or I mean, you're already home by the way, but whenever you meet up with those small kids in your neighbors, in your families, you please sit down with them for 10 minutes, explain to them, what are you studying? They'll ask you, ma'am, aapko डांटती नहीं है, homework नहीं मिला, summer vacation नहीं हुए, राइटिंग वर्क नहीं किया, ये नहीं किया. अब आप एक्सप्लेन करिए उनको, मीडिया समझाइए उनको, ब्रॉडकास्ट जर्नलिज्म आप लोग, मैम पढ़ाएंगी, हम लोग पढ़ाएंगे, आप समझाइए उनको. You would not be able to do it. We'll not be able to do it. Gauri, why I'm telling you this particular piece is, many times we fail to understand what are we trying to communicate, what are we trying to convey, what are we trying to tell the story for. And that is where we get stuck with the words, we get stuck with the way that we want to do. Please, what you call, unleash yourself in terms of what you want to communicate, and draw your energies from the audiences and what kind of a story you will do. You can take 10 parts, you can take 15 parts. But the moment you focus your energies on the audiences who you're going to tell your story on, whichever area, I think you will find your answers of what kind of a story and the way that you want to tell the story to them.
Thank you so much, sir. So now I'll request Ashwin to please sum up the session, because it's almost like 6:35. So yes, it was like 1.5 hour session, and it was so engaging, sir. And so many questions from the participants and as well. So I think even like Mehak had some question, Harsh want to ask some more, but yeah.
Next time Mehak has to answer the question, yeah. I mean, she has to kind of ask a question, yeah. I can see her.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Ashwin.
Yes, sir. We thank you so much for giving us your valuable time.
You want to ask something, Mehak? You have some question?
No, ma'am, we'll continue.
Okay, fine. Then Ashwin, you may, yes. You may proceed.
Yes, so I would like to thank you so much for giving us your valuable time, and your presentation helped us clear a lot of ideas and the notions we had about storytelling. So now I would like to request Professor Bhavna Pathak ma'am to propose to vote of thanks.
Seriously, sir, I have no words for this session. I mean, it was a mind-boggling session for all of us, for these future storytellers, I mean, who just got ample of ideas from this session about how to narrate a story, how to do the narrative transportation. I mean, I really love that word. And the context, perspective, and like real characters if you are studying or if you are narrating any story, so that people can connect with you, people can, I think this could also be one of the reasons that we are not, getting the Oscar awards, because I mean, most of the time it's being said that, I mean, the Indian movies are not that much real. I mean, that could be one of the reasons. So we should understand this reality. And if we know this, and when we do the narratives in that way, or when we really, I mean, and I think even the close observation really matters a lot. And telling story in a very simple manner also is a big thing, because, creating things in simple manner is a challenge. So making it complicated, it's every time easy, but it's, yes, but like, I mean, it's quite tough to make things in a very simple and precise and concise manner. So it was a wonderful session, and I really want to thank you for giving your valuable time to us. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. And
it's been amazing, because I just loved it, and some of the questions which the students are putting up are pretty phenomenal, and I think it just shows we have some brilliant students, and this is what keeps all of us who are into academics keep going, because we just thrive on that actually. One more thing, because ma'am, you said it, and I'll leave this thought with you. There's a wonderful study being done by Yale University around cognitive abilities and neurosciences and communication. So whenever you guys get time, do kind of stroll on that particular piece. They are very, very big areas, and in communication and media studies, I think getting neurosciences and sciences back to some extent is very important. And a lot of work we have done in the past in social development with communication for development as well. A lot of work is happening where we're talking of behavioral change and practices and norms and stigmas. I think they are very interesting areas. And so that way, media students are at the forefront of bringing about the change. So I'm very happy that, I was able to come here. And ma'am, thank you so much for persisting with my laziness and my preoccupation with so many things. And but thank you so much for being so nice to me. And
my father was also continuously listening this session,
Array,
so he was with me.
Very sweet of him. Thank
and
you so much.
he also, yes, he said, I mean, thanks to you for.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much to him. Yeah.
So I would also like to thank all the participants and to Ashwin for hosting this wonderful session, and the panelist Mehak, Harsh. Thanks to all of you for joining this session and making it, a memorable day for us. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Bye. See you.